This presentation is a re-recording of the one that we gave during the Water Infrastructure Funding Workshop. We had some technical difficulties with the recording, so we wanted to provide a recording. Because it will not be live, just note that there will not be live questions answered during this presentation, but we are happy to receive them via email, and we will answer anything that comes to us. We will be presenting clean water, stormwater, and wastewater, preparing for the 2024 pre-application process before it's too late. My name is Sarah Ridyard, and I am the Sustainability Engineer for the Wastewater Engineering Bureau at DES. As part of my role, I manage the Asset Management Grant Program, which I'll be mentioning a little in this presentation, as well as work on wastewater planning projects. And I will turn it to Ethan to introduce himself.
Hello, everybody. Ethan Woodrick. I am one of two resilience and adaptation managers. I work for both the Wastewater Engineering Bureau and the Drinking Water and Groundwater Bureau. As my title alludes to, I do resilience and adaptation related work as well as implementation projects, and I'm also involved with the energy program. Over to Deb.
Thank you, Ethan and Sarah. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Deb Loisel. I'm a stormwater coordinator at the New Hampshire Department of Environmental Services. I work in the Watershed Assistance section, which is part of the Watershed Management Bureau. My main job duties include managing stormwater and non-point source projects that are funded by the Clean Water SRF loan program, and also to provide assistance and guidance to the New Hampshire MS4 permittees. Thank you. Sarah, I'm going to pass it back to you.
Great. I'm going to cover the outline of the presentation. First of all, we're going to start with the first part of the presentation, the overview and setting the stage. We already covered our introductions. We'll give a high-level overview of the Clean Water State Revolving Fund. We'll talk about the timeline for applicants this year. We'll get into the Green Project Reserve, or GPR, and then we'll have a question slide. There is a break between the first part and the second part of the presentation. In the second part, we get a little more detailed. We will look at the ranking process for projects after they come in through the Clean Water SRF application process. We'll go through stormwater ranking, project types, and GPR for stormwater. Then we will move into wastewater, again covering ranking, project types, and GPR, and then again a question slide at the end. Give the high-level definition of the Clean Water State Revolving Fund. This is a partnership between the federal agency EPA and our state DES to provide funds for planning and infrastructure projects to improve water quality. And this does include wastewater and stormwater, and included in stormwater is non-point source as well. From a high level, if you're interested in looking at different project types and eligibility, we recommend you review this document from EPA that there's a link in the presentation. In general, if a project has a clean water element to it, we like to see that highlighted in the pre-application because that really is the basis of the eligibility. So please keep that in mind. We're pleased to be able to offer these funds, and we look forward to helping people make their pre-applications strong. It is a competitive program, and we want to see the best pre-applications come in. There are many requirements to go through the Clean Water SRF program to get the loan funding. I'm showing some of our guidance documents here that cover stormwater planning, wastewater planning, and Clean Water SRF wastewater infrastructure guidance. These documents will be helpful as far as listing a lot of the specific detailed requirements. Please also visit our website. I'm showing a screenshot here. This has the most detailed information on project requirements. Also, Beth Malcolm's presentation from the opening session provides some additional information. I like to highlight a couple of the project requirements up front so people are aware of these. These are some of the things that take a little lead time getting into the project. One of those things is we do have a requirement that if you're working with an engineer on one of these funded projects, that you select that engineer through a qualifications-based selection process. So that starts with the issuance of a request for qualifications, or RFQ. If you're unfamiliar with this process, we have some information available, and we can answer questions as well. We also like to mention up front, if you are interested in applying for funds through this program, you need to consider the fact that you will need to provide the authority to borrow. Typically, most small towns find that they have to go to their town meeting to obtain that authority to borrow. So as part of the planning process, it's good to know about those up front. And again, please do visit the website. There are many requirements for the projects. I'm not going to go into detail on them, but there's an environmental review process that happens up front as well, and many other steps along the way. Our staff is always happy to help, and we look forward to helping applicants navigate the process. And I will turn it to Ethan.
Hello again, everybody. So I will be going over a just broad overview of the Clean Water SRF application categories, just to give you a better idea of what's involved with each category. So kind of paralleling the two, wastewater and stormwater, top to bottom, they're pretty similar, but you'll see asset management as the first category in each. If you weren't able to catch it, there was a separate session on this last Wednesday where Deb and Sarah were actually both part of that. So hopefully you were able to register and you can get a copy of the recording there to rewatch it at your leisure. But also Sarah will be going into this in a little bit more detail in this presentation as well. Planning projects you'll see under both. This is a little bit more of an ambiguous category, so I did provide some examples there just to help brainstorm. So you'll see rate studies, wastewater facility plans, vulnerability assessments, I&I evaluations, etc. But in the previous slide, Sarah did cover the wastewater guidance documents. There is a more comprehensive list of typical planning project scopes in there, but there's also the opportunity, if there's something that hasn't been covered before, if you have questions on it, there is an option for DES approval, so that's not an all-encompassing list on the guidance document either. Then moving on to infrastructure projects, this is, your typical run-of-the-mill rehabilitation, maybe upgrade project, aging infrastructure that you typically see come through a Clean Water SRF program. Sewer extensions, I won't go into this in too much detail. It is handled separately as a separate category. As you can imagine, that is an extension of your collection system of wastewater mains typically, but we will be scoring those separately. We don't typically get a ton of applications or pre-applications in this category, but if you do have any questions on that, please feel free to reach out. Energy Audit Measure Implementation, or EMI, as the title alludes to. This is for implementation projects that come out of an energy audit. I will go into this in further detail later on in the presentation. And then emerging contaminants. This is another category. I won't go into too much detail. There was a separate presentation on this last Friday given by Zach Lorch. Again, hopefully, if you're interested in that, you were able to attend and get the recording coming out of it. But if you did not, or have follow-on questions, please feel free to reach out. Jumping over to stormwater, again, the categories are very similar, asset management, but then planning projects. Just to give a couple more examples here, specific to stormwater management plans, capital improvement plans, preliminary design plans, etc. Meaning there's also a stormwater guidance document for planning projects, and you can get a more comprehensive list there. Same rules apply. If there's a project, a scope that you're looking at that's not included on the list, there is an option for DES approval for those types of projects. And then one other thing I did want to touch on that's a little bit more specific to stormwater is there is an infrastructure with planning component application. So if you do have a planning project that will eventually lead directly into an implementation project, you can actually combine them under one application. It's kind of a little bit more of a streamlined option there. Next slide. Just a brief funding overview to give you an idea of what we're looking at for funding opportunities this year. Long story short, spoiler alert, none of the categories have changed the offerings from last year. So if you are familiar with those, these will look very, very similar. Again, I'll jump around from top to bottom here because stormwater and wastewater match each other exactly. So you'll see for asset management for both, 100% principal forgiveness or grant up to $30,000. And then wastewater and stormwater planning, again, match 100% principal forgiveness up to $100,000. Jumping back up to the top, you'll see wastewater energy audit implementation for 50% principal forgiveness up to $250,000. And then wastewater emerging contaminants. Again, this was covered in more detail in that presentation by Zach Lorch, but if you do have questions on this, there's a capitalization grant, 100% subsidy / principal forgiveness. And then last but not least, there is an additional note. You'll notice there's some projects, i.e. infrastructure projects, that aren't included on this list. If you've been through our process before, you'll know it's kind of TBD, meaning we're working on it. There's information, input data to determine these final amounts that we don't necessarily have yet. And those include a percentage of the loan disbursements at the time of the initial principal and interest repayment, as well as affordability scores. So as you're going through that process, we will work with you as well as work through the process to get you those final amounts. Next slide. And I'll give it over to Deb.
Thank you, Ethan. So during this part 1 portion of the presentation, I'll be providing you with a high-level overview of the pre-application process. And then during part 2 of the presentation, we'll go into more detail on all of these topics. So last week during the opening session, Beth Malcolm, who is the Clean Water SRF Loan Program Administrator, went over some of this important information, but we want to make sure to emphasize it so that you know where to find it and also provide you with some helpful hints. So first, we want to let you know the pre-application is available now. The deadline for the submission of a Clean Water SRF pre-application is Friday, May 31st, no exceptions. Let me repeat that. Friday, May 31st, no exceptions. So my best advice to you is that you submit your pre-application in advance of this deadline. I also want to inform individuals that the stormwater and wastewater pre-applications will be reviewed and ranked separately. At the bottom of the screen, you can see the Apply Now button, and this is live when you click on it in this presentation. And when you do, you are going to see the following. So this introduction page provides you with important information to start your pre-application. One important message is that you'll need to have an account, which includes a username and passcode. Some of you may already have this account if you have filled out previous applications in previous years, but you may need to update your passcode. So we just want to remind you of that. If you do not have an account, then you can create one. And for more information on the registration and how you can create an account, you can click on the How do I register for an account on the right-hand side. Another item, I know that many of you are working with colleagues or consultants on your pre-application. So you can actually share your pre-application with these individuals, and you can find the instructions on how to do this by clicking on the How do I share a form with another user? These questions and other FAQs are noted on the right-hand side. You can see is highlighted on this slide. On this same introduction page, you will also note there is a contact name and information. Kathy Beret is noted and should be contacted if you have any questions or issues regarding the pre-application, or if you have questions on a full loan application. And that with the full loan applications would be for those that were authorized for funding based on the 2023 pre-applications. However, you should contact your program manager in the stormwater or wastewater program if you have technical project-related questions. We can assist you on how best to connect your proposed project with the categories in the pre-application and addressing other, again, project-related questions. So the stormwater and wastewater program manager contacts are noted at the end of this presentation. And one big thing we don't want you to forget is to save your application. Now, I understand there's an autosave, but I certainly would not fully rely on that. You never know when you're going to lose power. We certainly dealt with that most recently. Hopefully we won't between now and May 31st. But I highly recommend that you hit the save button in the upper right-hand corner often. This is a great feature, and it allows you to fill out your pre-application in phases and as your time allows. But again, remember, the deadline is May 31st. So as you start your pre-application, you will be able to view your progression and see the main topics as noted on the left-hand side of the slide, and that is circled in red. The first portion is the applicant information. Next, you will provide general information on your project. When you're making your selections, it will collapse or add additional questions as seen here. If you have an asset management project, you will check that box at the beginning of this pre-app. Please refer to the clean water and drinking water asset management presentation that was conducted last week for information specific to asset management. Sarah is also going to provide some additional information during part 2 of this presentation. So the following information is for the planning, infrastructure with planning, and infrastructure categories, whether it be wastewater or stormwater. Where it states, please select the option below that describes your project, you will need to check off the appropriate box. And you can see that here on the slide. And you will continue progressing through the pre-application by selecting the pertinent topics. Something new this year, so please pay close attention. This year, only a municipal representative will be able to submit the pre-application. I know there are many of you who work with a consultant to prepare your pre-applications, but a consultant will not be able to submit the pre-application this year. Here is yet another good reason to submit your pre-application early and not to wait until the deadline of Friday, May 31st. The next button at the bottom of the page is what a municipal representative will click once the pre-application is complete. So essentially, that will be the last step that is done on this pre-application. So stormwater and wastewater projects have specific guidance documents, and they can be accessed at the New Hampshire DES Clean Water SRF Loan Program webpage, or by clicking the Guidance for Clean Water SRF Loans field, as you'll see there on the left hand of the slide. Another important document, in probably one of the most important documents that you will want to have as you're filling out your pre-app, is the ranking criteria for stormwater and wastewater planning and or infrastructure projects. And you'll see that on the right-hand side. But make sure that you have the proper ranking criteria, because stormwater and wastewater have separate ranking criterias. Some of the categories are roughly the same, but there are some specific guidelines in each of those. So just please make sure that you have the appropriate one. And again, remember, these applications are all ranked with the exception of the asset management category. And really, these ranking criteria are your Bible. So last week during the opening session, again, Beth Malcolm went over some of these critical timelines. But again, we feel it's really important to bring to your attention. So I'm going to go over the 2024 timeline that is relative to the solicitation that is currently open. So again, May 31st of 2024 is the deadline to submit your Clean Water SRF pre-applications. Once we receive those at DES, the DES staff will be reviewing and ranking those applications during the month of June. And then just to continue along the 2024, so on July 25th, the draft project priority list, we also refer to it as the PPL, will be posted on the New Hampshire DES webpage. And this is when the public comment period will begin. On August 1st, we will hold a public hearing. You're welcome to attend the public hearing. It will be done virtually. Beth Malcolm will be sending out some specific information on that, on how you can actually join the meeting. But that's not your only opportunity to provide comments. You can also provide comments in writing as well. But the important date to remember is that that public comment period will end on August 8th of 2024. Once we receive all the comments, we vet through them, we make changes as appropriate. We anticipate that the project priority list, again, or PPL, will be finalized around the beginning of September. This is where you will see the noted projects that have been authorized for funding. So now we're going to talk about 2025. So this will be for the folks that have received authorization that their project has ranked and has been listed as being authorized on the PPL list. So on or around March to June of 2025, and Sarah referred to this a little bit earlier, this is typically when the municipalities will get their authority to borrow. And then the full loan applications will be due on June 30th, 2025. And then we would anticipate during the summer to fall of 2025 is when the New Hampshire Governor and Council would approve those loans and the funding, and that's when your project could begin. So now I'm going to turn it back over to Ethan to talk a little bit about the GPR, or the Green Project Reserve.
Thank you, Deb. So as Deb mentioned, this is the Green Project Reserve, or as we refer to it as GPR. Very creative, I know. Just to kind of give a brief overview of this, what is it exactly? You may have heard us talk about it in the past, or maybe seen it on the pre-application. Potentially you've used it before on the pre-application. But long story short, it's sustainable methods that we would like to implement into clean water projects. And you can see some examples here in the bulletized list below. I won't go through them in their entirety, but just kind of do the quick run through. The intent is to reduce environmental footprint, building up resilience, enhancing water conservation, addressing wet weather flows, improving energy efficiency, concentrating on innovative technologies, or even encouraging low impact development. There are 4 main categories that you'll see. So green infrastructure, water efficiency, energy efficiency, and environmentally innovative. You'll see these on the ranking criteria as well as on the pre-application, but I wouldn't focus too much on the main category titles. You can kind of get a good idea of what's included in each just by how they're phrased, but there's also sub-bullets within subcategories rather within each one of these main categories that are actually specific to a project type or a project scope. So those are where I would put more emphasis on. Next slide, please. So to go a little bit further to elaborate on kind of the important side of it. So just to be honest and straightforward, it is an EPA federal requirement, so that is why it's included. We have an obligation to meet a 10% minimum investment in all clean water SRF funding that we allocate or give out within a given year. So that means within all the total projects that we see or give out funding for, we have to implement GPR actions or work type projects, etc., that meet a 10% allocation of the overall cost. And to further emphasize the importance, it is something that we want to focus on from a DES perspective. These are important areas, and it should be actions that we are already looking at implementing into projects, but even more so as resources are becoming thinner and thinner, even from a funding perspective. These are types of initiatives that we should be looking at into incorporating into quote unquote regular projects, right? As well as standalone projects. And to further emphasize that and to help promote these types of actions, we have allocated a certain percentage of the overall pre-application points for the ranking perspective to GPR specifically. So you'll see wastewater and stormwater listed here. They are both allocated at 25% total for GPR. The point totals are a little bit different, so it's 30 points for wastewater and 25 points for stormwater, but it ends up being 25% overall. So as you can see, that is a large chunk of the overall project ranking, and if it were to be completely ignored, you're missing out on a good portion of the overall points available. Next slide, please. I'll turn it over to Sarah.
So as I mentioned at the beginning, this is a re-recording, so we actually don't have any live questions to answer, but I did want to mention we are available to answer questions through phone calls or email, and our contact information is going to be at the end of the presentation. So please do contact us if you have questions when you're watching this recording. And we also will not be actually taking a break because this is, again, a re-recording. So I'm going to pass it right over to Deb.
Great. Thank you, Sarah. So I'm going to kickstart part 2 of this presentation. And during this portion, I'm going to talk a little bit more in depth about the pre-application process and some helpful hints. So first of all, it is really imperative that you fill out the pre-application fully. We are not mind readers, so make sure that you note all pertinent information, provide ample information about your project. If you skip a section, you will not receive any points. You might say, hey, Deb, I've been talking to you about this project for months. You know everything about it. Why do I need to write anything? You do. You need to take whatever is in your mind and you need to put it on paper. There are a multitude of people reviewing these presentation or applications, and it's really imperative. And like I said, again, we aren't mind readers, and we really are taking things at face value. So it's very, very important you fill out the pre-application fully. We also want to let you know that we're available to assist you, and we're really happy to do so. So please reach out if you have any questions, whether it be on the actual pre-application or you have a project-related question, please reach out to us. Again, as Sarah had mentioned, program manager contact information will be noted at the end of this presentation. So one thing we do ask is that you please don't wait till last minute. The closer we get to that May 31st deadline, the more questions we're going to be having, probably more meetings with individuals. So please plan accordingly. And again, remember the deadline is May 31st and there are no exceptions. So as I expressed in part 1, I cannot emphasize enough that you really need to have the ranking criteria for stormwater or wastewater planning and or infrastructure ranking project applications open and by your side or on another screen. These guides have extremely important information on how you can receive points. And again, this is what the stormwater and wastewater reviewers will be using during the review and ranking process. You can obtain the ranking criteria in a few different ways. On the left-hand side of the screen, you can see you can get it from the Clean Water SRF loan program. Very easy to identify how to get that. Or better yet, when you open your pre-application on that introductory page, you'll actually see the ranking criteria right there in the main body. And again, you can see there is a difference between wastewater and stormwater. So make sure you have the appropriate guidance material. So again, stormwater and wastewater have separate ranking criteria. So please be sure to have the correct one when you're filling out your pre-application. You can see on the slide here on the left-hand side, it's for stormwater and non-point source projects. And on the right-hand side, it is for wastewater. When you look at it from a high level, you'll see we both have 4 categories. But when you look at the subcategories, they're slightly different. So again, you want to pay really close attention. And on the first page, it is just some general information. But on the remaining pages, that's where you'll receive details for each category. So you'll want to be, paying attention to that. And it's going to be extremely beneficial for you, especially with the GPR, the Green Project Reserve section of the pre-application. So where you're asked to provide information on the proposed project, please be sure you provide sufficient information so there's a clear understanding of the issue and the goal pertaining to your project. Use the field to provide ample information. You have 1,500 characters, so use it to its fullest. This is also a good time to note the Green Project Reserve components of your project. I would also highly recommend that you provide photos, reports, and other documents that are pertinent to the project and that would be useful for the reviewer to have a good understanding of your overall proposed project. You can provide this type of information as an attachment, but one thing I'll mention about the attachment is that you can only submit one attachment. So what you'll need to do is if you have multiple documents, you'll need to merge those into a single attachment and then upload just that one attachment. But again, please use that to its fullest. We see a lot of times that is underutilized. And here you'll hear me say again, don't forget to save. Again, really easy. Just click that button, make it a kind of a regular habit. Click it, save, save, save. And as you've heard us mention, and you will hear us mention throughout this presentation, feel free to reach out to us. We're here to provide assistance to you. We're happy to provide assistance to you and help work through the pre-application, or if you have questions on how your project can best fit the needs of the Clean Water SRF program. But again, please, please do not wait until last minute. So this concludes the general pre-application process and helpful hints. We're now going to provide you with some specific information on each of the main qualifying Clean Water SRF categories. So I'm going to start with the stormwater and non-point source categories. So I just want to start by saying when I am talking about stormwater as a category, understand that this is inclusive of non-point source projects as well. So if I forget to say and non-point source, please understand that is part of the overreaching stormwater category. After all, 50% of all non-source point problems are a result of stormwater. So in general, there are four main categories: asset management, planning, infrastructure with planning components, and infrastructure projects. So first, let's talk about asset management, although I'm not going to go into a lot of detail because this was covered under the asset management presentation session last week. And then in addition, Sarah's going to talk a little bit more later in this presentation about the asset management program. But the main point I want to make is that only 19% of New Hampshire municipalities have taken advantage of the New Hampshire DES Clean Water SRF Asset Management Program funding. So if you're looking at this slide and your municipality is noted in white, I encourage you to reach out to us to find out more about receiving a $30,000 grant for stormwater asset management. Because if you're noted in white, you are currently eligible for that $30,000 grant. So the next category is planning. You'll see on the left-hand side, I've provided a list of eligible project types, but please note this is not an all-inclusive list. And you heard Ethan mention this earlier. If you don't ever see a project on the list and you're thinking, I think it fits, I'm not sure, reach out to us and let's have a discussion and we can work through that eligibility and we'll be able to inform you whether it is eligible or not. But again, just high-level types of projects that we're seeing in the stormwater and non-point source planning projects is capital improvement plans, watershed-based plans, river corridor management plans, chloride salt reduction plans, stormwater utilities, and again, so much more. So what is eligible for a planning project? Well, up to 30% design, or what we refer to as preliminary designs, assessments or planning documents, the preparation of a basis of design report, equipment rental or purchase, laboratory analysis, and then there's others, but again, that you would have to reach out to us to make sure that that would be approved. And then for this category, we have up to $100,000 would be principally forgiven for these projects. But I do want to note, and this refers to any of the categories, you can put in more than what that maximum loan or principal forgiveness amount is. But that amount greater than the $100,000 would be at a low interest rate loan. So again, there is a guidance document that is specific to stormwater and non-point source planning projects. The document is going to provide you with all of the requirements that will be expected to be in your scope of work should your project be authorized for funding. And I do recommend that you do take a look at it to understand the requirements that we are looking at and to assist with your project costs for the pre-application. And you'll see here, I have provided a direct link for you to access that guidance document. So next is the infrastructure with planning component project. This is typically the next phase after the planning phase. And I see many applicants use this as they want to progress through a project. So many times what we'll see after the planning phase is that it identifies some additional assessment work that needs to be done. And that's where your planning can continue. But then they want to bring it to the final design, permitting, and bid process. So this is a really good category where you can combine those elements. So for the planning portion, again, can be paid for up to 30% design. Projects that need some additional research, for example, you might need some geotechnical information, some deed research, that would qualify. Projects that have a preliminary vision and wish to prepare the preliminary design and advance it to final design and the basis of design report. But the infrastructure portion, what is eligible is also the basis of design. So you'll see there, you can, the basis of design is eligible for either the planning or the infrastructure category. But it's final design, permits, bid documents, actual construction, and or construction engineering oversight. So should you put in an application and have a project that has an infrastructure with planning component, you would receive up to $100,000 of principal forgiveness. And then the infrastructure portion of your project would have a certain percentage of principal or loan forgiveness. That is not determined until all projects are reviewed and ranked. So we don't actually have that number until the PPL is finalized. The other thing I want to note is that you would want to refer to both the planning and infrastructure guidance requirements. And we'll talk a little bit about the infrastructure guidance document next. And then the basis of design needs to be completed either at the end of the planning phase or at the beginning of the infrastructure phase. All right, so lastly, the infrastructure projects. And you can see here, again, the eligible cost, our final design and engineering, bid document, permits, and that includes local, state, or federal, the basis of design report, also includes the preparation of an environmental review, which is a requirement of the Clean Water SRF for an infrastructure project, the actual construction or implementation of your project, engineering oversight. And then the last category we'll just talk about briefly is stormwater equipment. So as an example, a vacuum truck or a street sweeper, but it has to be something that is connected to improving water quality. So again, the principal forgiveness for the infrastructure category is determined annually. And again, after all projects are ranked, and it will be identified on the final project priority list. So here is the guidance document for the infrastructure projects. Again, I have provided you the link so you can just have some direct access right there. It outlines all of the requirements. Again, if you should have any questions on any of these guidance requirements or the process, you can feel free to reach out to me. So ideally at DES, we'd like to see a project start at either the asset management phase or the planning phase, and then progress through to the infrastructure or the construction phase. So I wanted just to take a moment to give you an example of a community in New Hampshire that really pulled this all together and has progressed through several of our Clean Water SRF offerings. So that municipality is the town of Marlborough. And in the early, it was actually, I think they started in 2019. They submitted for a Clean Water SRF asset management loan because it was a loan at that time with principal forgiveness. And they developed both a stormwater and wastewater asset management plan. And you can see here, they did some GPS points and some GIS layers, and they identified some really critical areas based on some condition assessment. So the asset management user manual that was developed as part of this project identified several stormwater projects as a result of failing stormwater infrastructure. But one of those priority areas was in the downtown area and consisted of over 100-year-old granite pipes, which were failing and causing sinkholes on private property. In addition, the sewer pipes were in close proximity to the stormwater pipes. Thus, should they fail, would cause water quality issues. So they decided to submit a pre-application for consideration of a planning loan with principal forgiveness. And I just wanted to bring up your attention to the bottom of the slide there. And Sarah's going to talk about this a little bit later as well, is that you can actually receive points on your pre-application if you have developed a asset management program, either stormwater or wastewater. In this instance, it's stormwater, and you're extracting out one of the critical projects or recommendations in that user manual. And the town of Marlborough actually did that. And I'm happy to say they were authorized for funding under the stormwater planning category and recently completed an alternatives analysis and a preliminary design. You can see that here. But last year, they submitted an infrastructure with planning component project for consideration so that they could advance the project to the final design. You can see here, because it was an infrastructure with planning component, it is noted both on the stormwater infrastructure project list and the stormwater planning project. But again, I just wanted to take the time to show you that you can successfully move through this process and take advantage of our variety of funding through these various categories. And I just want to say congratulations, Marlborough, and looking forward to working with you. So as you're filling out your pre-application, again, remember to have the stormwater and non-point source ranking criteria by your side. As I mentioned in part 1, there are 4 main categories, and you will aim to get the most points under each, because remember, this is competitive. So page 1 of the ranking criteria notes these categories, and that's what I'm showing right here on the slides right here. But you're going to want to focus on pages 2 through 5 for more details and also provide you some additional links. So now I'd like to go over some helpful hints. I'm going to start with GPR because this is where the majority of applicants, I think, missed the mark, and it's worth 25% of your overall points. So I just want to start here. So when you're filling out the GPR section, again, make sure that you are looking at the stormwater ranking criteria, and pages 2 through 5 of the ranking criteria provide additional information about your GPR and which section or sections are applicable to your project. As an example, and I've noted at the bottom of this slide, you might have a roadway project that is going to incorporate permeable pavement on an adjacent municipal parking lot, and you're also going to add some stormwater control measures. This would be an example of meeting GPR under Category A, Section 1.2-1. The other thing I want to note is that don't just stop at one category. Make sure that you're taking credit for as many categories as you can under the GPR that are specific to your project. Now, I'm not asking you to kind of reach beyond what you're doing and say, yeah, I'm not really sure, but let's just put that in. No, have some confidence that you're pretty justifiably going to incorporate those types of things into your project. So I just want to let you know, it really is easy being green. So forget what Kermie said. It really is easy, and if you, again, have any questions on how to meet the GPR, feel free to reach out. So now I'm just going to go over some real examples on pre-applications that I've seen over the years, examples of what you should and what you should not do when you're filling out your pre-application. And I'm hoping these will be very, very helpful to you. So this is a good example of a project description. They clearly outline the water quality issues and goals. And they also use the attachment option and included a cover letter, which also provided additional information on the project. Again, use this attachment section to include items such as additional project information, photos, scopes of work, opinions of cost, and more. Again, anything that's relevant to the project and is going to provide value to the pre-application. But again, remember, you can only include one attachment, so you'll have to merge multiple attachments into a single document. So I'd recommend you do this. So our next example is not such a good example. So while they note Stormwater BMP Dutton, that might be an appropriate project name, but it's not a good description of the project. You might think that just simply putting a project name and title allows the reviewer to understand fully what's going on. That is just not the case. Please use that project description. Unfortunately, this applicant did not provide any description on the project. So unfortunately, we would have to give very few points or no points on this project because it really leaves the reviewer to just not understand what's going on. So this is a poor example, and please do not do this. So this next applicant does a really nice job under category 2, the water quality plan, noting how the project is relevant to a multitude of water quality plans. Again, you'll see that they're identifying the New Hampshire non-point source plan. They note the page that's relevant to their project. And then they also noted the 2010 Piscataqua Region Comprehensive Conservation and Management Plan. And you'll see they note that multiple times because there's several page numbers and recommendations outlined in that plan that are relevant to their project. So this is the type of thing that we are looking for. So do this. On the contrary, here's an applicant who, under category 2, noted nothing. Now, I find it very hard to believe if you're submitting an application, there is a water quality benefit, especially if you're submitting under the Clean Water SRF loan program. So there's going to be at least one plan that you can refer to. But this reviewer leaves us wondering, I mean, are there any water quality benefits? How does it fit into one or more of the New Hampshire plans? Again, we cannot provide any points if you do not provide information. If you're not sure how to fill this out, or you're thinking that you don't have any points to obtain here, please reach out to me because it is highly likely that you can. Bottom line is, do not leave anything blank. Don't do this. So the next example, another example on GPR. This applicant associates their project with GPR. You can see here the section number 1.2-1. They've calculated the cost, so about the percent of the project, the overall project that would be GPR. So again, if your project is associated with more than one GPR, please make sure to note all of them. And don't forget to incorporate some GPR narrative into your project description. So good job, do this. So this is my last example on GPR. Again, the reviewer is left to think there's no GPR points. There's nothing associated with this project. So the applicant did not identify any GPR. Again, it is highly likely that you can associate your project with at least one GPR section. And if there is not, consider adding in a GPR component. Remember, 25% of the total points for stormwater are associated with GPR, so give it your best shot. But remember, only note what you're truly committing to, or this could come back to haunt you. And again, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me as it pertains to stormwater and non-point source projects. Before I go, I'd like to take a moment to thank all of you because you are making a great difference in improving water quality and providing sustainable outcomes for generations to come. It is because of all of your efforts that I continue to come to work every day, and that New Hampshire is such a wonderful place to live and visit. Please, again, know your efforts do not go unnoticed, and I just want to say, keep up the great work. And with that, I'm going to pass it to Sarah to talk about wastewater.
Thanks, Deb. So Deb went through the stormwater project categories, and I'm going to do the same on the wastewater side. So what I've done on this slide is organized the titles of the different project categories as they are ranked when we put together the project priority list. So you can see the first category is asset management. Again, we have a separate presentation that covered that, so please tune into that if you're interested in that category. We have sewer extension. As mentioned previously, we aren't going into great detail on that category, but do know that those projects have their own ranking criteria, and they are ranked separately from the rest of the infrastructure projects. We have energy audit measures implementation, or EME, which Ethan will cover a little bit more. We have emerging contaminants, and if this category may pertain to you if you have PFAS in either wastewater residuals or landfill leachate. So if that topic is of interest, please watch the recording of Zach Lorch's presentation from Friday, which goes into more detail on that category. For my portion of the presentation, I'm going to focus on the planning projects and the infrastructure projects for wastewater. And that is what our ranking criteria pertain to that I'm going to show. So again, just a reminder where you can find things. If you want to look at last year's project priority list, that's available still on our website, and that might give you an idea of the different types of projects we see and the numbers of projects. And then again, another link to show you where the ranking criteria is found. Deb showed you a couple other places to find that, and we do want to just make sure you know it is imperative that you have that document available to you as you fill out your pre-application so you can understand the criteria that we use to rank projects. To go over the categories that exist in the wastewater ranking criteria. So the first one is the protection of water quality and public health, which has a total of 30 points available in that category. So you'll want to review the different elements here and determine which ones apply to your project. Category 2 covers green project reserve, which we've talked about a little bit, and Ethan's going to cover in a little more detail. Again, 30 points available in that category. Category 3 is aging infrastructure, up to 30 points in that project category as well. And then, as I mentioned, category 4, that covers sewer extensions. So there's several different items relevant to sewer extensions that we want to ask questions on. So be aware of that if that pertains to your project. I wanted to give you an idea. We've mentioned a couple of times this is a competitive funding opportunity, and this may help you understand the level of competition out there. So in 2023 for pre-applications on the wastewater side, we received 87 infrastructure pre-applications, 6 sewer extension pre-applications, 41 wastewater planning, 1 energy audit measure implementation, 1 emerging contaminants, and 6 asset management projects. Particularly, I want to note the infrastructure category. Of the 87 projects, our funds only extended down to the first 12 on that list. So please know that the ranking criteria does help you to move up on that list, and it is not a guarantee of funding to put in a pre-application. Other categories, we may be able to fund more, and I'll point out asset management is a category where we've been able to fund everyone who's applied in the past. So hopefully we can continue that, but no guarantees. We want to help as many communities as we can as they work towards their clean water goals. Just to zoom in on asset management for a second, you do have a little bit of a different pre-application. If you start answering the questions and you are applying for asset management funding, you will have a much shorter pre-application. So that will take you less time than the rest of the projects. And it shouldn't be too burdensome. If you are interested in that category, again, there was a separate presentation covering that in more detail. One of the really good reasons to do the asset management work is that when you get to the point of applying for an infrastructure project or a planning project, you can capture the points for asset management at that point. So if you've identified that infrastructure project through a criticality analysis in an asset management program, you'll be able to capture the maximum number of points under the aging infrastructure category. So that's 30 points right there, which is, a significant leg up on the competition, I think. I just want to mention, as Deb showed some examples of what not to do and what to do, here's an example of something we would offer 0 points for in that category 3. They didn't provide anything. So we can't give you any points if you don't give us any information. So even if you had used your asset management program to identify your project, but you just didn't tell us, we can't offer you any points because you didn't provide any documentation of it. This is an example of someone who answered the question well. They did provide a narrative description of how they use their asset management program to identify the infrastructure project. And then they also attached to this pre-application the risk calculations for the specific piece of equipment that was being funded through this pre-application. So this was awarded full points. So use this as a guide to help you understand the kind of information we're looking for. And next, I'm going to transition to Ethan to cover energy resilience and adaptation.
Thank you, Sarah. So to jump back into GPR in a little bit more detail, I've mentioned this before, but just as a reminder, a couple bullet points at the top. A complete list of GPR categories, or Category 2, AKA, can be found on the 24 Clean Water SRF ranking criteria. And then again, just as a reminder, GPR is 30 points, which is 25% of the overall. So it is important to focus on this area if you have applicable work. It's not like we're asking you to invent things that aren't there. But if it works for you, and if there's opportunities to put in points for these categories, then by all means, go for it. And just to reiterate with a little bit more detail, there are 4 main categories, as mentioned before. There's water efficiency, energy, green infrastructure, and environmentally innovative. I did include some common categories in the sub-bullets that we typically see on applications. This is by no means, like I mentioned, an all-inclusive list, but just to kind of help you brainstorm a little bit on what would be eligible. So under water efficiency, we have installing water efficient devices that could be used in a plant upgrade, pump station upgrade, etc. Energy, and this includes efficiency and renewable energy. You'll see implementing recommendations from an energy audit, which is the EMI category in itself. So that's a pretty easy one to go for if you are going for that type of pre-application. And then there's things like cost-effective I&I correction projects. And there's a little bit more to that category. It basically mentions saving energy through pump savings, right? So pump reduction, energy consumption through pump usage reduction. And then green infrastructure. So there's some stormwater related application or categories here. So there's downspout disconnection, which is basically separating stormwater from wastewater system. And then you'll see some within environmentally innovative. So a couple that I want to place some emphasis on here are vulnerability assessments. And then you'll see adaptation projects from the vulnerability assessments, which is basically the implementation portion. I will touch on that in a little bit more detail in the coming slides. And then last but not least, you'll see technologies to significantly reduce volume, generation, or chemical content of residuals. So this is your dewatering type technologies, sludge reduction, which is very important at the moment. So it might be a particular category of interest. Next slide. So as Deb mentioned, and Sarah also alluded to, we can't be mind readers, right? So the important part is the details for GPR, and you'll see 2 important kind of foot stomper moments here in both red and green at the top. So the first step is to identify, meaning you have to put in for the GPR points. If there's none claimed, again, we can't read the minds of the applicant. and you'll receive 0 points, long story short. But then the second part, number 2, is to substantiate, meaning if you put in for GPR points, there has to be some level of justification included within the pre-application. And that's all on the same lines. If you just put in GPR points, not saying that anybody would do this, but we don't want to promote freebies. So you have to provide some justification, some substantiation to prove that that category is applicable to your project. Thank you, Sarah. And you'll see 2 scenarios here. So the top and the bottom, the top being the frowny face, 2 bad situations here. The first being in the upper left-hand corner, and that is a snapshot from the pre-application. So what green project reserve project types do you have? And you put in, I do not have any GPR to include, and that's kind of like a womp, 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 frowny face. You get 0 points. Number 2, same result, meaning you claim GPR, but you put 0, like no justification anywhere on the pre-application. That is also most likely to get you 0 points and also a frowny face. The bottom 2 scenarios, so bottom left, that's again a snapshot from the pre-application. So what green project reserve project types do you have? And you'll see the categories there. So you select one or you select multiple, even if it is applicable to your project, and you're sitting cool with the sunglasses on in that scenario. But you do also have to do the bottom right, which I mentioned in the number 2 important point, which is substantiate those claims. And you can kind of do this in a couple different fashions. So if it is a more simplified category, so a good example of this is the implementing water efficient devices. That might be something that you just include in the overall project description, but it has to be mentioned in there. Even if it's a sentence or 2, just stating what you're actually going to implement into that project. And then the second part, and we do see this with some categories, and it's kind of setting the bar a little bit higher, is including additional attachments or justification, i.e. planning projects in a lot of ways. So a good example of this is some of the I&I related categories. We'll see I&I planning projects that were completed prior to this pre-application, and now they're going for the implementation component of that. So if they include the results, the recommendations from that planning project, that's going to most likely get you the highest points, if not the top total. Next slide. So just to mention really quick and piggybacking off of what Sarah went over in her portion, planning GPR. So if you are going for a planning project, we just want to emphasize, because we don't always see this happen, is you can put in GPR points for planning projects also. And, you know, the planning projects aren't always as competitive as the infrastructure projects per se, but they could be. And even if they're not, if you're 1 or 2 or 3 of the total that put in for GPR points, that can at least potentially float you towards the upper portions of the ranking. So don't forget to do that if you are putting in for it, again, if it's eligible categories, of course. And the idea here is if you were to use GPR on your pre-application for a planning project, if you come back with that planning project to go towards implementation of an infrastructure project, you could then reutilize those same GPR points potentially. Next slide, please. Moving over to the energy side. So really quickly to touch on the energy audit component. In big bold letters at the top, you'll see energy audits are provided at no cost, just ask. And it's as simple as that. If you've been through the process before, you of course know this, but if you haven't, or if you're just interested in, you know, what we offer for energy audits, please feel free to reach out. In the bottom left-hand corner, you'll see Sharon Null's contact information. So she is the main point of contact for energy audits and handles the scheduling component. But if you do also have questions, I put my email address, which is also on this presentation a couple of other times, but feel free to reach out to me as well. And kind of like the guy in the bottom right-hand corner is saying, you know, sure, why not, right? Energy audits are free, we're offering them. So again, if it's of interest and you think it's applicable to your system, reach out and ask some questions. Next slide. To kind of set the stage for the energy efficiency and EME component of this, you'll see 2 diagrams here, and not to pick on Hanover and Peterborough by any means, but this is a good representation of kind of the average of what we see in New Hampshire for the percentage of energy usage for wastewater and drinking water systems compared to the overall municipal level energy usage. And you'll see on the left with Hanover, they have 43% allocated towards wastewater and drinking water, and Peterborough 60. And again, this is a good representation, meaning on average, we see around that 50% mark. So as you can imagine, if utilities are using 50% of the municipal system's energy, and any energy efficiency projects that you implement on the utility side are going to garner significant savings in the overall. Next slide. So to go a little bit further on EME, or Energy Audit Measure implementation, in green again, you'll see the intent here is just to implement projects coming out of recommendations or findings from an energy audit. The funding piece, mentioned this before, but just to reiterate, there's 50% of project costs up to $250,000 forgiven. But on that same note, you'll see in red, contact New Hampshire Saves early in project planning. So New Hampshire Saves has some incredible incentives that could potentially help you with funding on your project. It just depends on the type of work, but you'll never know if you don't reach out. So you have to contact them, and the earlier the better, because they can help you with paperwork or justification, or even help you with the project potentially sometimes from a planning perspective as you go along. So the earlier you're bringing them into the process, the better and more seamless it will go, as well as you may get additional incentives through their New Hampshire Saves program. So a couple of items of note for the pre-application specifically. Again, you'll see, or I'm sorry, the specific energy audit measures to be included. There will be a component in the pre-application where it will ask you specifically what measures you want to include into the scope of this project. And if you go through one of our energy audits, you'll typically see a naming convention of ECM 1, ECM 2, 3, 4, etc. And that stands for energy control measure. If you are going and utilizing one of our energy audit processes, please include those in the application, because then there's no question on what type of work you're including. We can look back at that report. If it's ECM 1, 2, and 3, we know exactly what you're going for. The second bullet here is just another reminder, which you'll get another one in the following bullet, is to claim GPR for EME projects. So as I mentioned before, there is specifically even a GPR category for implementing projects out of an energy audit process, right? So from the get-go, that one is eligible. But there are also additional energy efficiency GPR categories that may also be eligible. So please don't forget to claim those. To expand a little bit further, energy audit measures can also be integrated into larger projects, meaning it doesn't have to be a standalone EME project. It doesn't have to be an EME pre-application. You could be doing an infrastructure project and then incorporating energy efficiency measures from an energy audit. And a good example there is if you're doing a pump station upgrade, a plant upgrade, and some of the components or recommendations that came out of your energy audit were to change out to LED lighting, adjusting thermostats, maybe adjusting VFDs or adding VFDs. Those are types of small kind of low-hanging fruit that then you can incorporate into a larger upgrade, and it would fall under an infrastructure project instead. But with that being said, another reminder, if you do that, just don't forget to put in for GPR points. And last but not least, one thing we do really want to emphasize, because renewable energy is gaining popularity or is popular already, is we do not entertain applications for renewable energy projects until all of the energy efficiency measures from an energy audit are implemented. Meaning, kind of like in the lower left-hand corner there, you'll see a guy filling up a bucket with water, but there's a hole in the bottom. And the idea here is you need to fix that hole, the energy efficiency piece of it, before you fill it up with anything, renewable energy-wise, solar, battery power, or battery backup, etc. So make sure you're fixing the leaky bucket first. And to give a shout out to Sharon Nall here, she would say E before RE, which is energy efficiency before renewable energy. Next slide. To touch on this really quickly, and just to kind of put a little bit of a spotlight on it, we do have energy efficiency design guidance that was created in collaboration with our energy audit consultant. And they are posted on our website, which you'll see the link here. There's actually one for wastewater and one for drinking water systems, but even if it helps just to kind of read through and brainstorm as you're going through an energy efficiency project to kind of garner ideas from, or really to kind of use it as more of a step-by-step guide. We do offer those resources and they are available on our website. Next slide. Switching gears to resilience and adaptation. This is a little bit more near and dear to my heart, as you can tell from my resilience and adaptation title, but out of all the examples of why it's important I can give you, which there's a laundry list, I will choose to pick one today. And it's emergency repairs are expensive, which if anybody's ever been through these types of events, including some of the pictures on the right, you will know this firsthand, or maybe you've observed a neighbor going through the same thing. And the estimates are 6 to 13 times higher, which is a pretty good range. And you would be correct if you're saying that to yourself. But even if it's 6 times higher, that's still 6 times more than you should be paying and or want to pay. If it's 13, even more so. But the reason why there is such a large range there is it depends on the type of event, meaning like an earthquake could be potentially higher than a flood event, right? And it also depends on the type of infrastructure that you're applying it to. Another item of note, which I'm probably preaching to the choir with the audience of this presentation, is infrastructure stability is critical to community rebound. Meaning if a widespread event happens, a natural disaster type of event happens to a community, the faster that utilities come back online, water, wastewater, internet, electricity, the faster the community can get back on its feet. And the overall goal here from a resilience and adaptation perspective is to reduce risk, right? So it's local risk management and also increasing system resilience or increasing adaptive and functional capacity, which you can see in the diagram below. There's no numbers associated with this, but you can kind of see the relationship of adding functional capacity over time when a response happens and the ability of a community to recover. Next slide. So going a little bit deeper or a little bit more specific into vulnerability assessments, you may have heard this term kind of kicked around recently too. And you're asking yourself, what is it exactly? And long story short, it's just a comprehensive look at your whole system. So in this case, we're looking at utility systems and we're looking at specifically natural hazards. So flood, drought, winter storms, ice storms, landslides, etc., and how those impact those specific components within your system. At the end of this evaluation, typically, you'll get some sort of scoring metric to help you prioritize different components within your system based on different events and figure out what you should address first. What's the most vulnerable, right? But more importantly right now, and one of the items I did want to stress is in the red there in the middle, is it's now an EPA Region 1 NIPDES requirement. So if you haven't been notified that your NIPDES is coming up for renewal, then you will eventually, but this is fairly new within the last month or so. And a couple of items we wanted to offer up just as options that currently exist are listed there in black below. So DES currently has a pilot study going on called the Climate Change Vulnerability Assessments, or CCVA. We had 9 communities involved at this in the moment, and the end goal here is to have this wrapped up by the end of this year, but with the intention of eventually, at least potentially covering the entire state. So if you are interested in that type of initiative or you just want to hear more about it, please feel free to reach out to me. I'll talk your ear off about it. And then the second one is, which we've mentioned already, but a little bit more specific, is you can put in a wastewater planning project for vulnerability assessments. And if you are going to put in for this type of initiative, just make sure it is of equivalent scope and matches the NIPDES requirements. If you need help with that, need some inputs, again, feel free to reach out. And last but not least, probably for the 8th time I'll mention it, vulnerability planning and implementation are GPR eligible. So if you are going to go for a planning project or even an implementation project, please put in for GPR on the pre-application. Next slide. And last but not least, to kind of bring it all together, here is a GPR example. I won't go through this in its entirety, but it is pretty straightforward to walk through and kind of reference on your available time, if you can read through it and kind of reference this going forward. But just to cover really quickly, you'll see in black in the chart, we're going to go ahead and assume that this project has an existing asset management program. So like Sarah mentioned in a previous example, that gets you 30 points potentially there. And going back up to the description, you'll see this is a larger plant upgrade. And then I have corresponding GPR categories color coded, if you will, and then the corresponding point calculation in the chart below. So you'll see one for energy efficiency, water efficiency, environmentally innovative, and vulnerability assessment and implementation. And then the point calculation at the end, you have 35.7, so we'll call that 36 points. A couple of items I did want to point out and bring to light here is you'll see the point calculations for the individual GPR categories, and you might say, at least for this example, those aren't a lot of points. And you would be right, again, for this type of example. And the reason there is this is a $12 million project. So any GPR related work is going to be a small fraction of the overall cost, and just based on the proportionality of how we do the calculations, it's not going to be a huge cost or a huge point value. But if you had a project where it's either standalone GPR type work scope, then it would be a larger portion of the overall cost and therefore be a larger point value at the end. But the other point I did want to make, and this probably is even more important, is we typically see common blocks of point values when we're doing the rankings. So 30 points or 40 points where you might have gotten asset management, or you got renewing aging infrastructure, a couple of other categories. But again, we'll see 10, 15, maybe 20 projects sometimes in those same point values. So anything you can do, even if it is a couple of points from GPR, could potentially push you into the next tier and be the difference between getting picked up for funding or not. Next slide. And with that, I'll turn it over to Sarah.
Thanks, Ethan. So we did want to provide contact information for ourselves, the presenters. And as Deb mentioned a couple times, we are the right contacts to reach out for the technical questions related to projects. I've put the categories of projects to contact us about. So you can see those there, and feel free to give us a call or an email. Please don't FaceTime us, even though I picked that picture on this slide. Some of our colleagues in grants management are the best points of contact for pre-application questions or loan questions. So those are Kathy Bray and Beth Malcolm. And then we do have design review contacts as well in the Wastewater Engineering Bureau. And Dennis would be the right person to talk to about your wastewater infrastructure project. And then we have a couple other people in that section as well. So please feel free to reach out for questions. We're happy to help. We want to sum everything up with a couple of closing remarks. First of all, the Clean Water SRF is really intended for projects for cleaner water. So please make sure that that focus comes through in your pre-application, and that includes wastewater and stormwater related projects. Reach out to us with questions sooner rather than later. We don't want to be scrambling to try to get you answers on May 31st, but we are happy to help you as we can. Do incorporate sustainability into your projects, and you will be awarded GPR points. There's lots of great examples in this presentation of how to do that. And know that it's on the applicant to identify and substantiate the GPR that's going to be awarded. We will not be offering you points for things you do not include in your pre-application. Now is the time to submit that pre-application, and the deadline is May 31st of 2024. No exceptions to that date. You must submit by that date. And it's encouraged to get it in as soon as you have everything together. And new this year, this is a big one to remember, is that a municipal signature is required. So it would be through the online form that happens, but it cannot be submitted by a consultant. It has to be a municipal employee that submits the pre-application. Just want to mention a few of the other presentations that took place during the Water Infrastructure Funding Workshop. Again, this is a recorded presentation, so they're not upcoming any longer, but these recordings are available as well if these topics are of interest. And again, as we are recording this session, we don't have any live questions to answer here, but I wanted to leave you with our contact information. We are happy to help. So please do reach out if there are questions following this presentation. And thank you for listening, and we appreciate everything that you do.